all, I'm Jagon Chichon, and as Francesco said, my presentation is about teachers' perceptions in Japan to the use of the first language in the second language classroom, specifically universities. So yeah, like all good presentations, I'm going to start with a very short quote. Okay, so so basically, this one's by Crashin and Terrell. Just to point out that the L1 shouldn't be used in the language learning process, but obviously this one's quite outdated, so 1983. But it tends to represent the methodology of the majority of initial teaching qualifications, like the CELTA, Trinity Cert. They generally adhere to this kind of methodology, and generally it's sound. We want the students to use the second language as much as possible, and everything like that. But it tends to be based on learners within ESL classrooms, so English to speakers of second languages. So usually learners with a variety of first languages within the room, usually within the host country. But as we can see from the following quote by the British Council, learners in foreign language contexts significantly outnumber second language contexts. So that means that the majority of teachers are teaching learner groups that share the same first language. So, in those sort of contexts, occasional L1 use might be beneficial, possibly. So, like for example, in Japan, I teach very low-level students, and occasional L1 use helps them, I think. And yeah, there is recognition of this. So yeah, there's a number of studies that I've found that suggest that prudent use is beneficial. So yeah, the most recent one there. So prudent use is the key word there, right? And yeah, I think that's supported by this quote by Swain and Lamkin. So here he's talking about the L1 being used as a mediating tool. So there's a close connection there to Vygotsky's socio-cultural approach. In that we use the L1 as a scaffolding agent to fill those gaps between, what the students don't know and what they do know, and hopefully there's a way that we can use that in some way to help them acquire the target language. So yeah, alongside this kind of this information about EFL context, the motivation for this study came from my own experience, both personal language learning experience, but also professionally. So obviously I'm a very low level Japanese learner, so extremely low level, and without English, I wouldn't be able to learn Japanese. I don't think I need it to understand content. To make comparisons and things like that. So it helps me. So I understand why my learners might also need their first language. And the other reason for this presentation was my professional experience. So as I was saying before, the majority of you guys arrived. In a previous role, I had an observation with a line manager, and in the post-observation feedback meeting, my line manager said to me, good, but there were some students using Japanese, so please stop them from doing that. And he suggested I go around and tell them, no Japanese, no Japanese, no Japanese, And for me, that didn't sit well, because I was teaching at a very good university. The student body were highly motivated, and during the discussions, they were predominantly using the second language. They were predominantly using the target language. They were using English as much as possible, and occasionally using their own language. So for me, that was perfect. That was like peer learning, peer teaching at its best. They're working together, moving away from my direction, moving towards becoming autonomous learners. So Yeah, so both of those experiences and the whole idea of EFL context and things like that motivated this presentation, but also also the paper that I produced for this. Okay, I've been ignoring my notes. Yeah, so, so now I probably need them. But yeah, so that's the background to my study. But yeah, now I'd like to talk a little bit, you know, in specifics. I forgot about that picture. Okay, yeah. So first of all, I'll give you a brief overview of my findings, discuss the content, context, the participants for the study, and the data collection methods. Then I'll outline my hypothesis, summary of the findings, then some suggestions from me. Only suggestions, not hard and fast rules necessarily. And then at the end, as Francesco said, there'll be some time for questions and answers. So yeah, in terms of what the literature says, contextual factors are significant influences on teachers' perceptions of first language use. So in terms of contextual factors, it could be things like learner proficiency. So if students' proficiency is very low in English, maybe teachers might be more receptive to L1 use. And similarly with task difficulty, if they're dealing with very difficult content, again, filtering in the L1 might be beneficial in those situations. And yeah, numerous studies have found similar findings. Yeah, and these tend to influence teachers' perceptions. So based on what I'd read, I sort of assumed this would also be true in my study, that teachers would be influenced by context. And generally this was true. But there was a couple of interesting findings that I identified as well. So yeah, because I assumed context would be a factor, I chose 9 participants from 2 completely different universities. So 2 completely different universities in terms of syllabus, student body, and things like that. And I used survey and semi-structured group interviews to get an idea of their perceptions to the L1 use. This was really useful, the semi-structured group interviews, because it allowed us to go off in different directions, and I got some really good data from that. All of the teachers were native English speakers, all highly qualified, sort of diploma level, Delta, master's level. Teaching experience ranged from 5 to 20 years, and length of in Japan as well, 3 to 20 years. So yeah, quite diverse. But yeah, as I said, I wanted 2 separate contexts to see if that did play a role in their views. So I'll speak a little bit about those 2 contexts. So firstly, University 1. Yeah, I won't name the universities just for anonymity, but yeah, University 1. So University 1 is one of the top universities in Japan. Very, very motivated student body, generally strong English proficiency as well. The syllabus was sort of discussion based around topical issues that were interesting towards the learners. So not so much grammar. More about sort of productive use, about topics they were interested in. And also, class sizes were quite small, between 10 and 16 learners. The teachers there had very low Japanese proficiency, and their time in Japan was also relatively short. Conversely, University 2 was very different. So the syllabus was an English for specific purposes syllabus, and they were focusing towards economics. They used an economics textbook, but the economics textbook was aimed towards young professionals working within that industry. And given that the students were they had low English proficiency, these kind of concepts, this vocabulary and grammar was quite complex for them, especially if you consider, economics text, the vocabulary is quite specialised. So in that respect, the students were dealing with difficult content and also low proficiency as well. But the interesting thing is the teachers there, they've been in Japan for a long time, so 10 to 20 years, and most of them were highly proficient Japanese users, so they were completely comfortable with the culture, the language. So based on this, it probably seems quite obvious, but based on this, the fact that the students were so low, the content was so difficult, large class sizes, so some classroom management issues, highly proficient teachers, my assumption was, okay, University 2 teachers, they'll see the benefits of the first language, obviously. They can use it intermittently to help their students. But actually this wasn't the case. University 1, the teachers at University 1 appeared to be more positive towards it. And I couldn't really understand why, but generally speaking, because the students were so well behaved and obedient, the teachers didn't perceive the L1 use as a problem necessarily. So they allowed their students to use it as they saw fit, and occasionally they would feed it in. And as you can see here, this is a quote from one of the teachers. They generally saw the L1 as a positive. So as we were talking about before with the whole idea of it being a scaffolding agent, they sort of saw it as the same sort of thing. Their students were well behaved, they were managing their L use appropriately. So no problem. Another reason why they supported L1 use was again this whole this concept of the context. As you can see in the first quote there, they obviously adhere to the English only policy, but they do see that there are benefits to L1 use. And actually this last quote here where the benefits of using it might outweigh the negatives. I think any of us, if we've been in the classroom, sometimes it can be a quick fix. It can be easy, it can be simple, instead of complicating the issue for the student. So so University 1 generally more positive. Conversely, University 2 teachers were generally negative, which was surprising. As I said, I didn't expect that. But for them, again, context was behind their perceptions. As I said, the students, for them, lacked motivation and maturity. So for them, they didn't think that their students would be able to manage their L1 use appropriately. So they insisted more on an English only policy, which is fair enough. And this participant acknowledges that if the students are motivated, then you can sort of give them a little bit of free rein to an extent. But an interesting finding that came out. So the majority of these teachers at University 2, as I said, they'd been in Japan for a long period of time, and they all had significant experience of teaching within the Japanese public school system. So they taught in junior high schools and high schools, and this seemed to impact significantly on their perceptions to their present context. As I said, we use these sort of semi-structured group interviews, and I made no mention of the Japanese public school system, but these participants frequently mentioned their experience and particularly the overuse in Japanese public school systems. So if any of you have worked there, in certain schools, not all necessarily, but the grammar translation method is prevalent there. So it's just Japanese use predominantly and English occasionally. So it doesn't necessarily support output so much. So you can sort of appreciate that. So those two things were significant. And actually that was generally what I found. So context, as with other studies, was significant in my study too. But the interesting thing was that the past experience impacted significantly. So So based on these findings, I had some suggestions which I published, and I'm going to share with you guys now. So although I appreciate that these teachers teachers' reasons regarding the maturity and motivation of their learners, I accept that, but my problem with that is that they were dictating policy to these students. So they said they were immature, they lacked motivation, but then they were treating them like children, So then why not attempt? Not necessarily, it might not work, but why not attempt to negotiate policy with the students to sort of, empower them, give them the responsibility to think how they're going to manage their own learning. Again, probably, I know most of you are thinking practically that wouldn't work, but my point is just give it a go. That's what we're here for. The second thing would be for managers and universities to have more realistic expectations. As I said with my manager, but universities as well, they kind of insist on this English-only approach, but it's not realistic, not in every context. For example, University 1, it probably is because the students are high level, they can use the target language perfectly, but in the context I'm working in, that's completely unrealistic. It would be impossible for my students to use only English. My final recommendation, is the idea of training. So when I was doing this study, I spoke to various teachers, not just the participants, and each of them, some were like English only, some used Japanese a lot to help their learners. So you had this kind of up and down approach. So I would sort of consider maybe working with teachers to sort of think how we might use the L1 in a standardised way, so we incorporate it into pedagogy, so our learners have a similar experience with that. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly and it was all easy to understand. Does anyone have any questions?
Now it's time for questions, so if you have any questions, feel free to.
Again, it's not necessary,
Come on, name names. What universities are they? That's what I want to know.
University 1 Hitotsubashi,
Oh, wow.
University 2 Meiji Gakuin.
Wow.
Oh, Meiji Gakuin is not.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No. But the student body there, they were like, they were like, I don't know, like proper teenagers. They were just kind of, they were more interested in, going to the cinema, whatever, partying. It was just, it was a nice experience actually with those, but it was hard to manage. And actually the teachers, I actually taught there for a semester, but the teachers that were involved in this course, it was a year-round course, and different level learner groups. So the very sort of low-level pre-in, surprisingly, were very large classes and demotivated, things like that. So
That was in Totsuka, right? Yokohama.
Yeah. Well, I was it's Shirokane and Totsuka, but I was in Shirokane. They're in Totsuka.
Last question. You compare these two universities with 9 different teachers. How about your own context? Do you use Japanese to your students when you give instructions or explain something, or do you allow students freely to use the L1 during certain activities? How do you apply the L1 to your context?
Yeah, well, again, it's difficult, like the whole idea of allowing someone as well. It's, like when I was reading about this, that it was like this kind of imperialist approach to language learning, and I know we're teachers and we should be pushing for target language use, and I do push for that. But like, for example, in my present context that me and Brendan and I work in, some of my classes, they don't understand my instructions, even if I grade my language. But my Japanese is very, very low, as I said. So I occasionally throw in a Japanese word if they're not sure of something, or I've got 1 or 2 students in the class that get things, but of that's of 20. So I've got 2, probably, or 3 that kind of understand and get the, understand the instructions, understand the written instructions or my demonstration or whatever. So I tend to try and use them to explain, not explain, but like, what is this in Japanese, as I'm sure we've all done, and then, yeah. So yeah, but again, my approach would be based on my context. So, for example, when I was teaching at Hitotsubashi, I would insist on sort of, well, not English only, but, the majority of the time, 90% English, something like that.
I liked what you said about prudent use of
Yeah.
Japanese. It's difficult to be prudent sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's more common to recognize or notice panic or desperate Japanese.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Suddenly the eyes glaze over, and you think that by inserting a little Japanese, people pay attention. But sometimes I don't think the students recognize that you're speaking Japanese.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have a very Japanese accent.
No, and you're right as well. And often as well, I kind of not mispronounce things, or I do myself in Japanese, because then they correct me, and it almost it's like an identifier, So, but no, you're right as well. But yeah, there's numerous challenges. Yeah.
Jagon, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really good, excellent food for thought. The topic of whether we allow, it's more of a comment perhaps than a question,
Okay.
sorry,
No,
if you'll allow me. The question of allowing L1 in the classroom, it seems like it's a topic that it seems that people are hesitant, teachers are hesitant to talk about or admit that they do. Because often in conversations, well, how much Japanese do you allow in your class, or do you, and how do you go about it? And the experience that I had is the level that I'm teaching is, for example, first-year university students, a TOEIC score of about 480 is the average. And so it would be, at that level, it would be really difficult to only use the L2, especially in doing pair work, group work activities where, you're doing communicative-based activities.
Of course.
And so, based on my own experience, I'm from Montreal, Canada, and in our context, we work in a bilingual context,
Yes.
and where code switching is very common.
Yeah.
And thanks to code switching, we're able to have a full-on conversation. Like even in business context, you could have in one sentence the use of both languages. And then I remembered that, and that gave me the permission to relax on that and allow the students to do some code switching themselves. And they themselves, after that, were able to. It was obvious that they could relax, and after that, it opened the door for them to be able to communicate more freely. So.
Definitely, and especially with sort of bilinguals as well. That's a perfectly natural thing for them to do, isn't it? To code switch, and for you to tell them absolutely not, you're going against everything now, aren't you? One thing I would say as well is when you were saying about the way teachers perceive it, like they're almost keep their L1 use quiet. It was exactly the same in that study. Some teachers were saying that it represented like a skills deficit if the teacher couldn't convey their message any other way. But yeah, I don't necessarily think so. I think you try in the target language, and if it doesn't work, or if certain students don't really get it, then you throw in an occasional word. Thank you.
We don't have enough time for more questions, but you can continue discussion later if you want.
Okay, excellent.
So
Yeah,
that's-
thank you for.
Thank you very much.